20. And we're actually not dealing with a 10 commandment tonight. And the reason is there's 10 of them, and we've walked through all 10 of them. Right? We have spent 10 weeks walking through the 10 commandments. And so we finished those up. And let's think about for a moment where we are in the book of Exodus. The very beginning, God's people are enslaved in Egypt, and they cry out to the Lord. And we read that the Lord heard them. And in response to their cries, he raises up a deliverer. What's his name? Moses. What does his name mean? You remember? To draw out, lift up, absolutely. Because Pharaoh's daughter finds him and she draws him out of the river. Okay? And we paid close attention to that because essentially that's what the Lord will use Moses to do. Through Moses, the deliverer, the Lord will draw his people out of Egypt. Okay? And in all of this drawing them out, the end goal is that by drawing them out, the Lord is going to draw them to himself. Okay? So the purpose of Israel's redemption in Egypt is that they are brought to the Lord and will be established as his people. And in all of this, God is demonstrating his greatness and his glory. Okay? That really Egypt and the events there serve as the stage on which the Lord is making himself known and his name known. Okay? He does that in judgment against the Egyptians and against Pharaoh, and he does it because in the judgment of Egypt and Pharaoh, he saves his people. Okay? There's glory in judgment, there's glory in salvation. So he leads them out of Egypt, and he walked through the Red Sea, and they enter into the wilderness where we saw how the Lord begins to train and discipline his people in learning how to be people of faith. You remember walking through that? That the Lord sends these tests their way, right? So they're faced with a test of how will they respond when they don't have any water to drink. And then they grumble and complain, and Moses has to pray and intercede on their behalf, right? We looked at that. They face a test of faith when they don't have any food to eat. And how did they respond? They grumbled and complained. And Moses intercedes on their behalf, and he prays to the Lord, and then the Lord provides the manna and the quail. And on it goes. A couple more tests of water, and the people respond the same way. They grumble and complain. And yet the Lord continues to graciously provide. Even they're in the desert, Moses strikes the rock, and water rushes forth out of the rock each time because Moses intercedes and pleads with God to provide for their need, which he kind of serves as the example of what God's people are supposed to do when they face tests of faith. Cry out to the Lord and trust him to provide. Okay? So in all that, the Lord's teaching his people to be people of faith. And when we come to chapter 19, they come to where? Mount Sinai. Okay? They come to Mount Sinai, which this is where the book was always leading. Okay? Again, they've been drawn out to be drawn to. And so, when God told Moses to go tell Pharaoh to let the people go, he also included another phrase. Moses would go to Pharaoh and he would say, "The Lord says, let my people go that they may worship me in the wilderness." Over and over again, when Moses goes to Pharaoh, let my people go that they may worship me in the wilderness. So this was the intention. draw them out of Egypt, lead them through the wilderness, get them to this mountain, okay, where they will be drawn into this relationship with the Lord, and the means by which this relationship is established is called a what? Covenant. Covenant. The terms of the relationship, okay? This is who I'll be, this is what I'll do, this is how you respond, okay? That is the terms of the covenant. And as they arrive on to the mountain in chapter 19, God doesn't start with giving them law. Instead, God starts by reminding them what he's already done for them. So in chapter 19, the very beginning, God says that he bore them on eagle's wings and brought them to himself. Okay? So the law is built on grace and what God has already done. However, it's through Israel's faithfulness, their obedience to this covenant, that they will become the people God saved them to be. So just to remind you, and this is very important for the rest we're going to see in the covenant, look at Exodus 19, verse 4. And I'm going to read through verse 6. So verse 4, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. That's a reminder that the Lord has saved them, that he redeemed them, that he's shown grace. Verse 5, how should the people respond? How should the people respond to the graciousness and the salvation the Lord's given them? Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. Okay? So here's the covenant. Here's the defining aspects of the relationship. I'm the Lord, your God. I saved you. I've protected you. And for you to be treasured people, holy nation, kingdom of priests, you must be faithful to this word that I'm going to give you. You must be faithful to do this covenant, okay? And what this covenant will do is guide the people how to live in fellowship with him, okay? Because one of the things that we're going to see is the covenant will define the relationship so that God can dwell with his people. Okay? That's what the covenant will function to do. So, what we're going to see is all of verses 25 through 31, and then verses 35 through 40 is about a building or a tent called what? The tabernacle. What is this tabernacle? It is a dwelling place where God will be with his people. And it's going to be mobile, okay? Because the people, they're not in the promised land yet, are they? No, still in the wilderness, okay? They'll be there for a minute, all right? We'll see that later in the story, okay? But God is providing a way through the terms of this covenant for his presence to dwell within his people. Okay? This covenant will define how that works and how that will be possible. Okay? So the book ends, the tabernacle is complete, God's presence is on top of the mountain, on top of Mount Sinai, and the book ends with God's presence coming down from the mountain into the tabernacle. And where is the tabernacle in regard to the people? Right in the middle of them. Right in the middle of the people. That's where God belongs. In the center of the people. And the people will have access to him. His presence will be in their midst. And so this covenant is going to teach them how to be a kingdom of priests, how to be a holy nation, what it means to be a treasured people among all peoples. Okay? So, we saw the 10 commandments over the last 10 weeks. That's the first part of the covenant. That's not the end of the covenant, okay? In fact, 21, 22, and 23 outline more terms of the covenant. But the foundation of the covenant are those 10 commandments. That's the foundational truths. And what we'll see starting next week, chapters 21 through 23, is test cases for the 10 commandments. In other words, God is going to highlight certain situations, and He's going to explain how the 10 commandments apply to their everyday life and situations. Okay? So the 10 commandments are not to be just what a lot of people do, plaques we hang on the wall. Instead, they will guide everyday life for His people. It will define how the people live in relation to the Lord and in relation to one another. And then the section ends in chapter 24 with this ratification, okay? Kind of like the event that makes the covenant binding, right? That puts it and establishes it in place. And what they do is they sacrifice animals and they splatter blood on the altar, okay? And then that section will end with Moses and the 70 elders enjoying a meal in God's presence. That happens in chapter 24. So my hope is that starting next week, we're going to really pick up some speed in Exodus. I don't know how long we've been in Exodus, but I know it's been at least a year, right? We've been in Exodus. And when we come to chapter 20, we're halfway through the book. There's 40 chapters, okay? I can't do another year in Exodus, okay? So we're going to have to pick up steam and try to do big themes as we walk through the rest of the book, okay? But what I would like to do is close out chapter 20 tonight, and I want you to notice how Israel responds after the Lord speaks the commandments, okay? Because remember, when God is speaking the 10 commandments, He is speaking from the top of the mountain directly to the people, okay? In all the other dealings God has had with His people, in the previous 19 chapters, how did God do it? Through Moses, through the mediator. But not so with the covenant, not so with these 10 commandments. God speaks audibly for all the people of Israel to hear as He's on top of the mountain and the people are gathered at the base of the mountain. So, what we're going to see is, okay, when God finishes speaking these 10 commandments, what's the response of the people? Okay? How are they hearing and perceiving these commandments? Okay? So, and then I'll end with considering, okay, what's God's purpose for the law? Okay? So let's look at chapter 20. I'll read 18 through 21. We saw verse 17 last week. That's the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. Now verse 18. Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of Him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off, while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. Okay. So we have the people of Israel standing at the bottom of the mountain. They have now heard God's voice, and they've heard it thunder, and they've heard trumpets. Have you ever stood close to someone playing a trumpet? Like right next to them? It's loud, deafening, makes your ears ring. That's how loud it is. That's what the people are experiencing. They've seen lightning and fire and smoke, and we saw in chapter 19 the mountains shaking and trembling. And so, what did we read? How did the people respond? It says they were afraid, that they were trembling, they're shaking in their sandals. And we also see that they're hesitant to come near, aren't they? It says that they stood far off. You know what a lot of times we do when we see something that makes us afraid? What do we start doing? We start backing up. We put distance between us and whatever that is. Well, that's what this is how they've responded to the scene of the Lord and His presence and His word. Fear and trembling and hesitant to come near. Now, this description is not new. In chapter 19, the same scene is described. The same lightning and thunder and trumpets and smoke and trembling. And the reason why is, if you'll just glance, you probably don't even have to turn the page. It's Exodus 19:18. All these things are going on. The thunder, the lightning, the thick cloud, the trumpet blast. Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it. See that? Why is all these things going on? Because the Lord is there. He is presently at the top of the mountain. And all of these frightening sights and sounds are going on the whole time God's given the Ten Commandments. Right? It's not like this is what's happening, then God starts to speak, so all that stops, and then God gets done speaking, and we're told that those things start back up. No, the thunder, the lightning, the trumpet, the smoke, the fire, the shaking, all that is going on as God's speaking. Okay? Absolutely. He's in the cloud. He's in the thick darkness, as it says at the end of chapter 20, like what we just saw. And so what the people were seeing and taking in are the visible manifestations of God's glory. Okay? The visible signs that He is present is what is going on. And because He is present among them and because He's holy, that's why in chapter 19, Moses set up a boundary, right? The Lord said, don't let any of the people break through and touch the mountain, because what's going to happen to them? They'll die, they'll perish, they'll be destroyed. But it seems by the time the Lord is done speaking the Ten Commandments, that boundary was totally unnecessary. Moses didn't have to tell the people, don't come too close. It was very much evident that they should not come too close. Because the manifestation of the presence of the Lord. So why are they so frightened? Let's think about this for a moment. We've seen the response, but why? What about this scene elicits the response of fear, trembling, backing away? That's certainly part of it, right? They've been grumbling and complaining the whole time, and then God shows up before them, and they're like, ooh, this might be somebody we might want to be careful around. Right? That's possible. Sure, absolutely. I think one thing that frightens the people of Israel here is, in one sense, the law itself. God had just given them His righteous requirements. Like, what does God expect from his people? What's the standard? What does he want from his people? And then he speaks the 10 Commandments, and the people was like, uh-oh. Do you think the Lord is requiring more from them than maybe they expected? Sure. I mean, most people that I speak with that don't know the Lord personally, like, they speak about God very casually. Almost like he doesn't have any requirements for them. No say that he's just like they are, and they're cool with the big guy upstairs. And so when God reveals and it's plain who he really is, it strikes fear. There's more to this than I thought. And we should absolutely, rightfully respond that way. They couldn't see until God said it and revealed what he's like, that he was demanding total allegiance to him in every aspect of life. He required them to love and worship him alone. He required that they love one another in everything that they did and said. Like, when you take the 10 Commandments, you got to see God has a lot to say over our lives. Who we worship, how we worship, what we do with our days, what we do with our stuff. Isn't that in these commandments? What we do with our bodies, over who we sleep with, isn't that in these commandments? He has a lot to say about those who bear his name. And so perhaps there's a lot of that in the people now, like, I didn't know it was going to be all this. Okay? These are all new concepts and realities and ideas that would require complete and total, unwavering obedience and faithfulness. So, I think they're understanding God is making absolute claims over their worship, their time, their relationships, their possessions, their bodies, their speech, their desires. Right? The 10 Commandments covers all those things. And he wanted them to obey all of them all the time. And so perhaps that's stricken fear in their hearts. Because, one thing that would be wise of us is to know what's required before we agree to something. You think that's wise? Like, before I give my word to somebody about something, I want them to explain to me all that it requires. Okay? And say it's right, say it's wrong, whatever. The people, in chapter 19, verse 8, do you remember what they said? We'll read it just to refresh our minds. All the people would answer together, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. So they've already said, all that the Lord will require of us, we're going to do it. They've already put their word to it. And now they get the explanation of what all that means. Now, that's not to say if they knew on the front end, they would have not agreed. Okay? The whole point of this is that there was an agreement and that this is what was going to happen. Okay? Has anybody ever heard somebody teach that Israel sinned by agreeing to the covenant? Anybody heard that teaching before? Nobody? Have you ever heard that? It's kind of in some old school dispensationalism that they sinned by agreeing to the law. I don't think that's true. Okay? I think this is what God wanted. It was God's will for them that they agree to this covenant. But anyway, I think they're frightened to learn that they agreed to this kind of all of life aspect of what it means for the Lord to be your God. All that would require of them, and so maybe they panicked a little bit. Sure. Gracious. That's right. That's right. And that's another reason why there's probably some fear and trembling among the people is, right, there's such, they're getting a revelation of just how holy and righteous God is and how unrighteous they are, right? Because that's one of the things that we're going to see, what happens when we hear the law, is that we become aware of our law breaking. It's one of the things the Bible teaches. Why does God give law? To reveal that we are lawbreakers, that we are sinners. And so surely, if that's one of the purpose for God's law, then those people hearing it for the first time, what are they coming to grips with right here on this mountain? Man, I fall short of that. Yeah. You know, I don't think there was an Israelite that day who said, you know what, I've always worshiped the Lord and Him alone. You know, never coveted a thing, never stolen a thing. There's not a one present on the mountain that hears all 10 of these and goes, check them all. Feeling pretty good about myself. No, they are becoming aware of their sin, and they are in the presence of a God who judges sin. They have every right to be frightened and afraid. It's no wonder. For the very first time, they're probably coming to terms with, oh, I'm a guilty sinner. Unrighteous in the presence of righteousness. And that there's probably this sense, in fact, we know it is, because they go to Moses and they say, hey, we need you to go talk to him. Because why? What do they say? Lest we die. Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. But so one thing that's happening in chapter 19 is Moses is going up and down the mountain, up and down the mountain. And he's hearing from the Lord, and he's going to the people, and then he's going to the people, and he's going to the Lord, right? And so he's just acting as mediator. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, he knew. That's right. He knew. But in the same way, right, before we pray for anything, does the Lord know? Sure. Yeah. But, you know, we still, yeah. Same concept, I would say. Yep. All right. So, no wonder they're afraid. When they look on that mountain, they are confronted with the reality of their sin and their guilt. And so because of that reality, verse 19 is what we were just getting at. They tell Moses, we need a go-between, is what they say. We need somebody that will speak for us to God and someone who will tell us what God says. That's basically verse 19. Somebody read it out loud for us. Exodus 20, verse 19. Yep. So they're like, all right, you go talk to him. And whatever he has to say, you come and tell us. You speak to us, we'll speak to you. and you be the go-between. As soon as they hear the demands of God's law, they want a mediator. Okay? And really, what they're doing is they're saying, will you be our legal advocate, our legal representative? Okay? We'll speak to you, and then you go to him and tell him what we said. Okay? In other words, when you're on the mountain in his presence, you just represent us for us. Okay? You plead our cause and our case before him. And in the same way, God will speak to the people through the advocate, the mediator. And isn't this one of the first things people do when they get in trouble with the law? What do? They hire a lawyer. That's basically what they want Moses to be. Right? Oh, don't you love it? Yeah. Now they want him. Yeah. What was it? Chapter 17? They're ready to kill him, stone him. Right? You remember that? We want Moses. Yeah. Yeah. And he's actually going to show up later playing a bigger role. Yeah. No. No. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, Aaron's going to play a bigger role in the story, and then there's going to be a plot twist with Aaron, right? Um, he's going to be the one that essentially oversees the whole process of making an idol, a golden calf. And then, what's so funny about that, I can't help but laugh every time I read it, is that Moses comes down the mountain. You remember what Aaron tells Moses? Like they threw the stuff in the fire and it just showed up. It just popped out of that fire as a golden calf. Couldn't believe it, man. You should have been here to see it, right? But yes, but Aaron he'll be with Moses. And that's the other thing too, right? Like Aaron's going to be on some inside stuff information. He's going to be the one of the ones in chapter 24 that has a meal in the presence of God. And then he'll be one of the ones breaking the covenant, right? So anyway, so they want a mediator, they want an advocate. They hire, or they just ask Moses to be their lawyer. Okay? They're afraid to deal with God directly, and for obvious reasons. They've heard the commandments of his law, they've seen the fire, they've seen the smoke of his glory, and it was all too much for them to bear. So they beg Moses to go and do the talking. Okay? We don't want to talk to God, you talk to him. And then you speak to us yourself. Right? And really, we'll need to stop here and we'll pick it up. I'll make a note. We're out of time. Because I want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions if you want. All throughout the Bible, the way these people respond to being in the presence of God is how everybody in the Bible responds, by the way. Okay? When people in the Bible catch a glimpse of God's glory, they respond the same way these Israelites do. They're filled with fear and trembling at the awesomeness of God. So you remember what Isaiah says when he has a vision of the Lord? Isaiah chapter 6. Woe is me. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Basically, he says, I am cursed. I'm a dead man when he gets a vision of the glory of the Lord. And we see it in the book of Revelation Remember how John responds when he sees the Lord high and lifted up? You remember what did he do? It says that he fell down as though dead. Right? He just knew, this is it. I'm done for. And this is the response. God's holiness seems to put some terror in the hearts of sinners. Because there is a dealing with and a grappling with. I am guilty, unrighteous, and I am standing in the presence of holiness and righteousness and the one who judges all sin. Right? All right. Questions? Comments? Conversation? Any of that? Bless you. I didn't get through half of my plan. We'll do it next week. Bless you. Okay. Really, though, no questions? Comments? That's right. That's right. Absolutely. And one thing I kind of read, one thing this week that somebody made the point that a lot of people have in their mind, man, if I just had, the opportunity to be in God's presence and to be one-on-one with God and I'd just be able to ask him all the questions I've ever had about anything. And really what we're not considering what exactly that would mean, right? Our response would not be, I got these questions. Why? Our response would be to bow down, fall down, right? Confess, woe is me. I'm unclean. I am a sinner. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. I agree. Wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. But then also, it's like on the other side of that, one of the things the Bible comes along, especially in the New Testament, is that for those who believe in Jesus have no need to fear. Right? There's a real sense in which if you're a Christian, you've already gone through the judgment. Right? When Jesus stood in your place, he took judgment on your behalf. Right? So I've already been judged. Right? At the cross, Jesus was condemned in my place for me. Okay? So I have no condemning judgment to fear. Doesn't mean we won't account. Okay? Doesn't mean we won't account, but we won't account for sin. Okay? We'll account for how we've served. All right. Other questions, comments, conversation? None? All right, Mr. Kenneth, would you pray for us?